Okay, we're back with part 3. Um, I feel like I need to cleanse the energy. Except it's windy in here. Hold on a second. Okay. 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 So we left off. Seven of Wands. We're no longer. Seven of Wands in the reverse. We're no longer chasing the white rabbit. We are embracing this idea. It's kind of like after Neo first goes to the Oracle, he isn't convinced fully at that point yet that he is the one, but he starts working with Morpheus and Trinity and the other guys. Ah, that's so funny, because that's what this card is like too. Morpheus and Trinity. Okay. So that's where we're at. We're at now the second chapter. And we've got, I feel so, it's like this, it's an excitement, but it's like now I feel kind of nervous. Starting to feel a little nervous. Excited still. It's kind of like this feeling of like running with the bulls. I've never done that. My uncle used to talk about doing it. He never did it, but he used to talk about doing it. And it's like this like anticipation of like, okay, I signed up for this. I'm prepared. I signed up for this. I'm excited, but at the same time, like, I know as soon as they release those bulls, like, I'm going to be running for my life. And potentially getting trampled by bulls. It's terrifying, actually. But I am prepared for it as much as I ever could be. Hooey. Okay. I feel like my ancestors are all like right here with you, like we're rooting for you, but at the same time they're like, this is what it's led up to. This is what it's all led up to. Okay. The Queen of Swords. Queen of Swords. Sworn. I don't know what that word means. It sounds like it's a word in another language. I don't know it. The Queen of Swords. The Queen of the Thrones of Air. Okay. It came in the reverse, but this card in the upright has Medusa. What looks like Medusa, maybe not. It kind of looks like Medusa because those kind of look like snakes in their hair. Cutting off the head of a giant. Then maybe it isn't snakes in their hair. They might just have curly hair. It looks like snakes in their hair to me. And at first I thought of it being Medusa, but I don't know Greek mythology like that. There's the symbol of Virgo, and then the actual Omega symbol twice. Is that a zodiac symbol? It's not Virgo. That's Virgo. It's not, I don't know. I'm feeling like these waves of really heavy energy. Heavy, slow, dense. It feels like a soft, tacky goo moving over you. Like it's not just like flailing in water. It feels like it's so thick that like you can't move or breathe or see. It's just like all encompassing. Isn't that kind of what it's like in the Matrix for him? Like there's like that goo that like basically is like life sustaining, but like he has to be completely like he's like attached to all these computers, and then it has this goo, but like it's like once he wakes up and pulls those cords out, like he's like choking on it. Like it's kind of like that. Or like the black goo in Prometheus, which is something that we have now. It's a technology. It's a form of nanotechnology, but it's like this sentient black goo. Okay, so I had a dream one time. Weird dream, but I had a dream one time that I remember being outside and like everybody's like running around scared. And there were these like police officers. They were kind of like soldiers / police officers. But they were neither of those. They were some other service of people that were wearing like gray, almost like janitor's suits, kind of. Only they were like a police force, like a soldier force, like a military force rather. And they were driving around these big gray trucks, like these big gray vans. It's funny because in my head I just saw it saying VATS, like from fucking Fallout, the Fallout series. Only I don't know where that came from because I don't actually remember that from the dream. But like in my head as I'm like remembering the dream, I saw these gray trucks, which was in the dream. But like in my head I saw it saying VATS, but in blue. Which was weird. Because I don't remember that in the dream. But I do remember the gray trucks and everybody wearing gray. And they had these guns, these big gray guns that were weird looking. They almost looked kind of like laser guns, right? They were like laser guns. Like they didn't look like a normal like pistol or rifle or anything. They were like these like thick chambered or, you know, thick barreled, weird type laser guns. And they were shooting people with them. But what they were shooting out wasn't bullets. It was this, like, it looked like CGI almost. It looked like digitalized. And it was this black goo. It would shoot out like a laser, kind of. Like with electricity, it would shoot out like that. But when it would land on people, when it would hit people, wherever they shot them at, it would hit like a paintball, and it was black goo. And this sentient black goo would begin to completely cover the individual. And once it had completely coated them, it would digitalize, and you would watch them break down into pixels. And it would literally pixelize them, and they would break down and disintegrate into pixels, and then be uploaded. Like the gun would like suck it back in, and they would be uploaded into the technology of the gun. And then like, okay, so the guns were like really, they were like this big and they were like this thick, like shooting out the stuff. And then it would suck back in the pixels, and then out of the bottom where you would normally take the magazine, out of that came DVDs. And it would be a DVD of that person, of their entire life. But it was DVDs. And literally like on the DVDs, like it had like a picture of them on the front cover. Everybody had their own movie. It was like different for each individual, and like different kinds of movies. And it had like all of the characters in their movies, like all of the people that they were closest to and stuff like that were all characters in their movies. Their entire life was just scripted into this movie. And it was in DVD form, and like if you looked at the back of it, like you could read a little description of their lives, and it would have like little pictures on the back, like how DVDs were like little pictures of the movie, of like highlights of the movie, right? Different rating systems and stuff, like just like a regular DVD, only of these people's lives. And I remember being nervous, but I wasn't scared like everybody else was. Like everybody else was running around like with chickens with their heads cut off, right? Senseless. It wasn't like that. Like I already, as I was watching it happen, like I kind of had this feeling of like I knew what was happening, but didn't know what to do about it. And they approached me, and essentially like they didn't necessarily force me, but it was kind of like, are you going to join us, or are you going to get a movie of yourself? And I didn't want to become a DVD. So I accepted to become an officer. And they handed me a gun. And suddenly I was dressed in gray, all gray. And I remember like having this weird feeling where like everything started to seem gray. Where like really everything started to seem like black and white, right? Like life took on this different meaning. And it didn't have this same like value that it had just prior. And I remember like seeing this one dude, and like I had the gun, and like the person who just handed me the gun, like this, like, you know, they're a soldier too, but they're like up above me. They're like a supervisor essentially. It like had this weird feeling, like as soon as you put on the suit, like you feel almost like you're like working a desk job, right? Like it has that type of feeling. So that's my supervisor. They give me the gun. And so then they're like looking at this person that I'm supposed to shoot, and I'm looking at this person I'm supposed to shoot, and they're looking terrified. And I remember being like, listen, you don't, you know, if you don't want this, that's fine. But like, let me, like, you know, I was like comforting him. Like I was telling him like, it's not that big of a deal. This is what's happening to everybody. Like, you get your own DVD. And like then I started like trying to like coerce him essentially by like being like, your DVD is going to be really funny. Like it looks really good. Like, you know, you got all of these people and stuff like that. Like it's a good DVD. It's a good movie. And he was like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, like it's going to be okay. He's like, okay. So then he would like freely let me do it. I remember shooting him and watching him digitalize and taking it as DVD. I remember it being yellow, like not the DVD itself, but the cover of the DVD case being yellow. And I remember like, it's weird because I was still like somehow like explaining to him about his DVD, but he wasn't, he was the DVD now. And at that point, like my supervisor's just like, okay, you did it. Like, okay, go keep doing your job. Go get the others. And I woke up feeling like so uncomfortable because it was like, wait, did I sell my soul? Like, I couldn't decide if I was supposed to be on that side or not, right? I've had a lot of dreams like that, but in different ways. That just reminded me of this other dream that I had. We'll get into this card. We'll get into the second story, but in the second part of the story. But I had this dream one time that it was, sorry. It literally just like choked me, like I shouldn't be saying what I'm saying. But now I can smell the sage I'm burning and I'm cleansing. It's okay. It's necessary. It's the point. Okay. This is the point. So I had a dream one time that I was at this diner with my family. My cousins and stuff were there too. And out of nowhere, like that's just how the dream began for as much as I could tell. And everything just seemed normal and I wasn't fully aware I was dreaming yet. But then out of nowhere, like this bomb blew up, like came like and crashed like right into the restaurant or into the side of the diner and like blew a giant hole in the side of the diner. And as soon as that happened, there was like all of these militaries like marching through the streets and mowing people down, like shooting all these people. I've had a lot of different dreams that are similar to this. But this one is particular and unique and weird. So they're like mowing people down and all these people start running and like my whole family starts running. My whole family just leaves and they all leave me. And I remember for a second, like hearing them in my head almost be like, oh, we left her. But then being like every man for themselves, essentially, like either she'll die or we'll all die. So like they just all left. And I hid at first in the diner, but then like the one army that like left or whatever, I could hear that there was another army coming and I knew that they were going to come like through the restaurant to make sure that like they were going to kill anybody that was left in the restaurant essentially, right? So I rushed out and I rushed behind this post office box. What is that called? A mailbox, but like one of those bigger mailboxes, like those big blue ones that you can put like packages in that are in the cities, right? There's one across the street. And so I ran and hid behind it and I could see this other army come in, you know, just like a group of people come in or whatever and start pretty much just shooting everybody in the diner. And there were already bodies from the explosion, like people had already died. And they were just like shooting all of the bodies. They were shooting everybody just in case people were faking being alive. They were killing everybody. And then as that happened, all of a sudden I realized that the reason that they were doing that and like what I started to see was all these people running around were zombies. There was like a whole bunch of zombies and they're like running around and just eating the shit out of people. And it was really terrifying, right? They're running around and cannibalizing people. And like, so like the military is in there to like basically kill everybody because we don't know who's a zombie and who isn't. And these zombies are killing and eating everybody. And so I remember being like, okay, like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I also was like not well hidden, right? And all I was thinking was like, I noticed that like there were even these zombies, like the military people couldn't see me because the diner was across the street over here and I was behind the mailbox, right? But like I was completely exposed behind me and to the side of me. And there was like a street right here. It was like a T intersection of a street. And the diner was here. I was across the street here. And then there was a street right here, you know. And I'm like right here. So there's like this whole side of the street behind me and to the left of me where like I could see everything that was going on. I could see that these zombies are eating people. And I'm completely exposed. And I remember like at first just staying super still in order to not be found, which seemed sufficient. But then at one point, like all this zombie came up to me kind of slowly, but like the zombie approached me and I realized that it was Ed Helms. Pretty sure that's what his name is. The dude that played Andy in The Office. I don't know what I watched The Office when it first came out. I watched a few seasons when it first came out. But when I had this dream, it was like 2 or 3 years after I'd ever watched The Office. It was so random. I don't know why it was him. I think actually maybe The Hangover had just come out. I don't know for sure. I don't even know. He was just a random person. But I have random celebrities in my dreams a lot. So, like, it didn't really terribly surprise me. What surprised me is that it was him specifically. But he was a zombie. And so I remember being, scared at first. Because I was like, oh, shit. Like, what a weird way to go. I'm about to get eaten by a zombie. And it happens to be Andy from The Office. But I remember him, like, the reason he was walking and he like came up to me and like I could see that he looked like a zombie, like he looked dead and he looked like he was like decaying. But the reason that he was walking and not running like the rest of them was because he was just transitioning. Like he was still in the middle of his transition into a zombie, right? And he explains that to me and he's like having a hard time fully talking and he's using all of his energy like just before he officially dies to let me know like I'm still me, essentially. And he was like, I don't want to become a zombie. I don't want to kill people. I don't want to kill people. That's what's going to happen, and I don't want to do it. And he was like, can you please kill me? And I was like, what? And he's like, please, put me out of my misery. Like, kill me before I go and kill people. I don't want to become a zombie. And I remember having this, like, moral dilemma because I didn't want to kill him. I didn't want to kill anybody, but I also realized that, like, if I was going to survive, I was going to have to kill these zombies, right? And in order to protect myself or anybody that came against me, really. And that I didn't want to do that either, but he was already on his way out, so I would be doing him that favor. Plus, if he became a zombie, he'd probably just try to eat me, and I'd ended up having to kill him anyways. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And so he got down on his hands and knees and then laid backwards with his head on my lap. And he laid his head on my lap with his neck like fully exposed to me. And I took a pencil, a literal like number 2 pencil, and just started perforating his neck, poking holes all the way through his neck and just like very close together. And I was like essentially like sawing his head off, but with this pencil. And then as I was doing it, like he had almost like this smile on his face and he looked at peace. And I remember I was crying. It was extremely difficult for me to do that. I remember the feeling of poking into his flesh with this pencil and the feeling of the flesh like slowly breaking as I was perforating it. And it was grotesque to me. And it was something that was so like uncomfortable for me, but I knew that it was necessary. And he had this smile on his face and he looked at peace and he was really happy that I was doing that. And I realized that as I was doing it, like as I was killing him, all of a sudden there was like this line of people behind him, of people that were slowly turning into zombies themselves. And they were looking at me like I was a savior. And it was extremely overwhelming. And I woke up crying. And it was a really weird dream. And I remember like I tried to explain it to a couple people at school and they were like, okay, so I guess it wasn't at school. Where was I explaining it to? I guess at church? I was explaining it to my social group. And they were like, the fuck are you even talking about? You know what I mean? Like, especially because I was like talking about how emotionally invested I was in it. And they were confused about that. But it was huge. And like, I remember seeing this line of people and being like, damn, like I'm going to literally be sitting here forever, just like using this pencil to poke these people's heads off. But then I also had this idea when I woke up too, like the message that I received from that was like the pen is mightier than the sword. Which I've recently heard a quote that was like, it's not that the pen is mightier than the sword, both are equally as mighty, it's in how you use them. And I find both concepts profound. But that was the message. Like, it was so strange, but it was like, out of all the things for me to use to kill these people, to save these people, I had a pencil, you know? And I was saving these people, and like, it was just so wild. Because it doesn't feel like saving people to like do these certain things, but that's what it is. Okay. So the main character in our book, he's realizing now that this book is made for him. This book was made for him. He doesn't exactly understand how or why or what that means. Maybe it was made for somebody else that just happens to be very much like me, and we share the same name. But because I'm able to find myself in this book, I'm going to let it guide me. I did the same thing when I was hiking to Texas last year. For those who don't know, I hiked from Wisconsin to Texas. I took 3 different trains and hiked the rest of the way on foot. It took me 7 weeks. I was on the street. I mean, the train rides took like 20 hours, 30 hours, and 5 hours. And the rest was all just me walking on foot with a bag on my back, with a thermos, some granola bars, maybe 5 changes of clothes, and a big old bag of baby wipes in order to keep myself clean. I had $140 when I first left, and I used that on train tickets. And I think on an extra box of granola bars maybe, or like, yeah, I think I just got a little bit extra food. It was not that much money. It did not last that long. But I used it on train tickets, and I couldn't even afford the final train ticket. That one was given to me at a shelter in Missouri in order to get to Texas. But yeah, so I left with basically nothing, and I made it to Austin, and was on the street for about 2 weeks here before I got into a space. And I've been working my way up ever since. But over the course of that journey, I had 2 books with me. I had my Tao Te Ching, which I keep near me pretty much all the time. This was given to me by a coworker back in 2016, I guess that was 2016, the beginning of it. A friend of mine, a coworker of mine, James, is an author, and he studied like the Vedic texts and just Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, all of those different religious type things. And he gave me this book when we were working together, we'd start talking about philosophy and theology. And I was very much interested in the fact that he had studied Eastern mysticism and Eastern religions because I didn't grow up with them. So he would teach me a lot about them, and then he gave me this. And he was like, I feel like you actually understand this. He said, this is my personal book. It meant a lot to him, but he had other means to those things. He'd already researched these things. He just thought that it would be very helpful for me, and he felt like I was somebody who could actually understand it. And he wasn't wrong. This book has served me so much more than I could ever have imagined. Like, that man changed my life. There's been a couple books that have changed my life. The Bible changed my life. I was raised with it. But The Magic of Reality by Richard Dawkins was given to me by this astrophysicist I dated for a short period of time. That book changed my life. changed my absolute world. Really brought me to a new level of consciousness. And I started reading this one shortly after, and I still have this one, and I still keep up with it fairly consistently. Love it. So I had this book, and I had The Hobbit paperback, with the classic tale of The Hobbit. And I read this one as a devotion. It's a devotional. This was like my oracle the whole time I was there, before I started doing any sort of tarot readings or oracle cards. And for myself, I would watch other people's general readings on YouTube, but I had never actually engaged in those things myself. But so this was my form of oracle. And The Hobbit I read consistently. The Hobbit I read as if it were like a movie I was watching the whole time I was on this trip. And like the thing about it was that, like, you know, I didn't read it every single day. I would read it when I would get the chance to, and I would read just how much felt like I needed to read it. And it just the entire time up until I got into Austin, and that's when I finished it too, was once I finally got to Austin. I finished it like the first week I was here. And all of that, like, it just added up into itself, where it really felt like I was on this journey and like I was involved in this book, right? And like there were a couple times that it was making me super emotional, because it really did I love the LOTR series to begin with, like the entire Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings. I love all of it. But it was just like, and like, I'm a big fan of Skyrim, right? So like, I was like totally in this Skyrim mindset. And I literally like had just been playing Skyrim for the first time in a couple of years just prior to that journey. And so when I started on the journey, I was like, I'm in my main character energy, and this is me playing the main character. And I'm going to take this journey like a video game, as if I'm playing Skyrim and I'm the main character. So it all kind of just went together that way, in this weird and beautiful way. But it was very much like that. And it was kind of that feeling of like, you know, I was reading this book and I was using it as a guide almost. And I was like, yeah, like looking what to expect. And, you know, because some of the times like the chapters will end with like, but then they hear that the orcs are coming. You know what I mean? Like something like that. And like at that point I'd be like, okay, this book is telling me like to pay attention and to be careful of who it is that I'm interacting with this time. And like it kept me out of trouble a few times, and it directed my path a couple times too. And like, but at the same time I was at this point like aware that like I was the main character in my own book. So like it wasn't, you know, in the intermission when I first started out, like I took it like a direct directive. But as I continued on, it started to like take on more where I was like becoming true to myself and aware of myself and connected with myself, and was using these things as guides. I was using them as guides, but I also was stepping into my main character energy. I still am, to be honest. I kind of feel like that's the energy of where we're at right now too, is like this is where we're stepping into right now. Like the whole past year has been me coming out of this intermission. I just felt my stomach drop. Maybe it's just cramps. I don't know, but that's wild. So in this card, like I said, like it's wild because I can't tell. It feels like Medusa to me, but I'm pretty sure this actual image is David with Goliath. It's somebody cutting off the head of a giant. And so it's giving me a mixture of these feelings, of these, in the story of Medusa, Perseus, I think, is who ends up slaying her. I think. I don't know for sure, but I think so. And he does that by using a mirror. And he uses it to see behind him so that he's not looking directly at her. And that's how he has a sword, and he cuts off her head without looking directly at her. But he cuts her head off, and that's how he slays this monster, right? However, like, especially in modern times, like our post-feminist world, the idea of Medusa truly being a monster has kind of been put on the back burner for the concept that she was cursed to have the curse that she had. Like, she was cursed herself. Like, she was cursed. She was a beautiful woman who had been cursed by somebody who was jealous about her. And she was cursed with this curse that made it so that any man that looked at her would turn to stone. And the story was told, like, essentially because she was so ugly, right? Because she had snakes for hair, and she was a scary, hideous being. But it's also told now, at least, that that was more a representation that she had, like, these, like, snakes for hair, like these ropes for hair, like these boingy, thick braids or curls, like, as if, like, the Greeks were accustomed to white, fair-skinned people, but that this potentially was a darker-skinned person of potentially African descent of some way, and that they had dreadlocks of some sort, and that it was the jealousy from whatever witch that had, like, was jealous that this black woman essentially was receiving the attention from all of these men because she was so exotic and beautiful and powerful. And so she was cursed to the point where men were just, like, dying in her presence because they couldn't handle her beauty. However it's taken, the main message in those takes on that story is that there was an injustice being done to Medusa. She wasn't truly a monster. That was a lie. That was a way that people had become convinced that she was worthy of being slain, but that wasn't the truth, and that she deserved more than what she received, right? Essentially. Now, the story of David and Goliath is that David was practically a nobody. He's just a lowly shepherd, you know. He gets bullied himself. Like, he's not a great warrior. He's not a great warrior. But when this Philistine comes in around amongst the Israelites and is like, essentially the Philistines are encroaching on the Israelites, right? And they're trying to claim the Israelites' land, I believe. Or like steal from this specific tribe. They're trying to, I'm pretty sure they're fighting over the promised land or something like that at this point. Pretty sure it's something like that. I think so. But they have to fight over the promised land. And so the Philistines happen to have this giant, you know, this man is like 9 feet tall. Huge man, you know, probably weighs like, what, 500 pounds? Just a giant man. And the Israelites don't know how they're going to defeat him, but they know that they have to in order to claim the promised land, or keep their land, or whatever it is. So they send out their best warriors to defeat Goliath, and pretty much Goliath is just like kicking them left, kicking them right, chopping their heads off like it's nothing, and making it look like it's a game. And the Israelites are terrified, because they don't know how they're going to succeed against this great man. And then David, I don't know exactly, I don't even remember the story now that I think about it fully. But David is essentially this lowly shepherd, right? And he decides that he is going to try to defeat Goliath. And he almost gets, like, made fun of for it. Like, they're like, our greatest warriors weren't able to kill this giant. What do you think you're going to do? You're just some lowly shepherd. And he's like, well, I have a sling and some choice rocks that I found by the river. And they're like, you're going to kill the giant with a sling? You don't even have a sword? You don't have an axe? You don't have, like, a flaming buttress? You have nothing? Like, you have a sling? And he's like, yeah, but I also have faith in the highest power, in my highest power. I have faith in God. And they were like, okay, buddy, well, do your worst. We ain't gonna stop you. Who cares at this point? Right? They have no faith in him, but he has faith in himself. And so he approaches Goliath. Goliath starts taunting him, like, oh my God, your greatest warriors couldn't kill me, so now you're gonna send this boy, this tiny little, measly little boy. He's like, okay, fine. Go ahead, David. Take your best shot. And he basically just gives him like, I'll stand here. I'm not even going to try to fight you. Go ahead. Take your best shot. So David's like, okay. And he prays. And he gets in alignment with God. And he takes one of his stones out of his pocket. And he puts it in his sling. He starts swinging his sling around. And then he lets it go. And he throws the stone. And the stone happens to fly directly up, straight in between Goliath's eyes, and punctures his skull, which is like an impossibility. It's a physical impossibility, but the people are watching it happen. And by David's faith, this insane thing happens, and it hits it hits Goliath between the eyes, and implants itself into his skull, killing him instantly. He falls back, dead. And everybody's silent. Everybody's like, the fuck just happened? And so then David goes, and as any warrior would, when it came to having slain your enemy, he takes Goliath's sword, who he just killed, and cuts off his head. Right? And I'm pretty sure he like brings it back to the king or whatever to show. And then he gets rewarded as, one of the highest people in the land. Whatever. Okay, so the mix between those two, what I'm seeing is that it's almost as if like the injustice that had been done, like it's almost like a play on characters, or there's a movie that's like that. Well, the TV show Savage, brilliant. It's not an anime, but it's an adult animation movie, TV show, series, I should say. And in that, it kind of does this thing where like multiple, like we assume that, cavemen existed way back when, and that, astronauts exist right now or in the future. But like on a certain timeline, they all exist together. And so that's like something that we didn't see happening. The witch in the first chapter that curses the main character so that he can't recognize himself. And if she does it so that she can claim the king's throne, right? And the king is none the wiser. But what the curse actually does is blocks the main character from being able to recognize their own destiny or role within this book, within the entire reality, right? And so although she doesn't necessarily know that that's what she's doing, and the king doesn't know what she's doing, and the main character doesn't know, well, as soon as he meets her, he kind of knows that she's a dark witch, and he starts to find out that she's the one that his curse came from, but that only comes through knowing himself. And he's just getting into that right now. So where we're at right now in the book is that like he's starting to realize that this witch has cursed him by her curse trying to claim the kingdom. And the curse, and the reason why he hasn't been able to recognize himself, is because the curse that she put onto the kingdom, it is an illusion. She had to make the king is arrogant, proud, is very proud of his kingdom, okay? She had to convince the king that his kingdom was unchanged, that this was the kingdom that he had claimed, that everybody loves him. In fact, part of the illusion is probably to make people love him even more than they normally would, right? Everybody loves this guy. Everything's peaceful. Everything's great. He has the best army ever. He has the most greatest everything that there's ever existed ever in time, right? He has it all, this king, this pompous ass king, and he's just oblivious to the fact that he's been absolutely disillusioned by this witch. And this witch was trying to claim his throne. She's just an angry feminist, okay? But the illusion that she used, like I said, like that black cat symbolized like the beast within the never-ending story, that black dog beast that like is creating this void that's encroaching on the land of imagination, and it is robbing creativity of its source energy, and thus almost causing like the end of reality, right? Like it's not just the queen doesn't realize that this is what she's done, because she's also a dumbass. Anybody doing dark magic is a dumbass, right? So like we already know that. So like, because I keep saying it in every one of my readings, but she's a dumbass. She thought she was going to be able to claim the king's kingdom, and she just wanted what the king had, and she didn't want to do what the king had done to get it, right? So she does this magic, but what she doesn't realize is that she's literally set us all up for failure by doing that. She starts the end of the world. She didn't realize that's what she was doing. She doesn't realize that even if she gets claim to this kingdom, it's only going to be hers for a moment before everything is just completely obliterated, completely gone. But the main character, and that's the main character's destiny, that they're coming into an awareness of. Now, they already know this because this was put at the beginning of the story. And they read this at the beginning of the story, but they lost themselves within the story, right? And so now they're coming back to it, but they don't know the steps that it's going to take in order to reach this destiny and in order to stop this from happening. But they are now fully aware of this prophecy. They have this guardian angel that's been there this whole time in order to teach them, in order to protect them. It's Metatron. Metatron, which is like the as above, so below. Sorry, I'm getting downloads. Hold on. So they're starting to recognize this. They can see the image, but it's still in the reverse. Because they're not there yet. They're not there yet. They don't know. They don't know how they're going to get there. Sorry, I got lipstick on the card. They're not there yet, and they don't know how they're going to get there. But now they can start to see what the future holds. They're starting to understand the past better too, but they can definitely see what the future holds. We're actually further from the past than from the future at this point. In fact, we're far enough from the past that there's this like almost blockage between us and the past. The blockage being the intermission that we had, which the cover of which is the directives and the guides. But then it gets into the nostalgic aspects of our ego death and this process of ego death that we went through. So, like I said, it's like the same thing where like when I started this whole thing off, I started by like saying, okay, this stuff probably sounds really crazy to you. But then I was like, no, it doesn't. You're just telling yourself that. You're telling yourself that because you've then become convinced of the directive, but because you stopped trusting yourself. If you remember, if you saw my other reading, when we had the Three of Pentacles in the Three of Pentacles in the Adventure Time deck, sorry, the Three of Pentacles in the Adventure Time deck, this exact image is actually depictive of trusting yourself. But in the original Rider-Waite Tarot, in this original holographic tarot, it is depictive of following the narrative, the prescripted narrative, not your narrative, not your belief system. Has nothing to do with you. You're just doing what you think you're supposed to do. So, and it's hiding. The way that I have these cards set, I can show you the way that I set them up in order to continue the reading. Is like this. So like you can't see the cards underneath it. You've the main character has, in recognizing themselves and it required all of this healing and all of this ego death in order to get to the point of recognizing their destiny, right? But in the ego death that came, the ego death was here, in the ego death that came from recognizing this destiny, now they see their destiny. They see who they're supposed to be. But it's in the reverse. And it's in the reverse because as soon as they moved away from it, it now became this external directive, and it's hiding that ego death from them. And they're forgetting. Like I said, this is the double slit experiment. Like in the last video, the double slit experiment where, he's like, I'm looking at you, and as soon as I observe you, I'm measuring you. But how do I measure what is immeasurable without observance? And how do I measure what I'm not trying to observe without observing it? So we're seeing the other side of that now and what that looks like. The other side of the singularity. We strived so hard to get here just to find that the other side of it is not as simple as we thought it would be. Right? Okay. So let's see how this chapter breaks down. This is so wild and fun for me. Two cards came face down, and the star in the reverse came face up. Okay, so the star in the reverse face up. I really wish I wouldn't have gotten lipstick on this card. Okay. Star in the reverse. Okay, so that queen. So what she ends up doing, all right, in her attempts to claim this kingdom is she creates the time-space continuum, a split in the time-space continuum. That's what her magic does. Was she doing that intentionally? No. No, because she wasn't that smart to. This is why I tell people not to fuck around with black magic, because you think you know what you're doing, but you're not grand enough. You're not wise enough. You are not big enough to really truly see and understand the grand scheme of what you're doing. You only exist right now and in this time and space. And even if you can start getting into the astral realm and moving throughout time and space and having control over your own self in time and space, you don't control time and space. You control yourself within it. That's the only control that you have. So when you start to practice black magic, you start to dabble and try to control things that are outside of yourself. If you can personalize those things and alchemize those things within yourself, you can become, I'm not saying that there isn't master magicians out there, okay, when it comes to the dark arts. But you will become possessed for a period of time first, and then have to work through your possession, which most don't. Most stay possessed, right? Aleister Crowley himself had, like, by the time that he died, like, still hadn't figured it all out. And he's like the supreme, right? He's not real, which wouldn't agree with that. But many Satanists follow his theology. And, Lucifer themselves, the light bearer, they're the morning star. They're also the evening star. They are the beginning and the end. In the tangible reality. But all of those things are definitive. Lucifer themselves would admit their own divinity, their own existence, right? Like that's the whole point in getting other people, like the light bearer needs the light in order to bear, you know? And so like there's this whole concept of like, not you, that's why Lucifer tends to be a depiction of the innate duality within the nature of man and consciousness. Lucifer is the light, but the light is definitive of the darkness. You know, that's it. It wouldn't be the one if it weren't for the other. And that is the innate balance, but it's all still measurable according to one specific definitiveness. And that's the thing with this double slit experiment, is because it was one of, and that's why it's considered important right now in like our actual modern current times, is because it is just blowing our concepts of physics out of the water in so many degrees. I mean, it's what allowed us to start even being able to conjure the concepts of quantum. And, you know, we went from defining reality by physicality, by the physics being that you break an atom down small enough, you know, to quarks or to neutrinos or, you know, tachyons or whatever, the tiniest little molecule atom that we can, you know, even the Higgs boson itself, like we went from breaking things down to quarks to actually finding and discovering the Higgs boson, which gave us the capacity to essentially create something out of nothing using our hadron colliders. But that's still all quite definitive. There is not, you cannot measure the concept of nothing without the concept of something. Nothing is something. So this double slit experiment is just not properly well understood when this queen decides that she's going to try to take this kingdom with her magic. And what that does is that it creates a split in the time-space continuum. And now there is two different timelines that are happening. There's the timeline, like I said, the curse is what caused the main character to not be able to recognize their own destiny. There is the timeline of the curse, and there's the timeline of the main character and their destiny. Both are happening simultaneously, and both are functioning fully within their own reality. They're also intermingling, like how reality's dimensions tend to within string theory, right? All of these things are converging. All of these things are converging. And so, like I said, like, so that's, you know, there's this weird little rift. And right at that rift, right at the intersection, you know, like the way the double slit experiment works is that like you shoot light, protons, photons, atoms through, sorry, I'm not a physicist, through, you know, through something, and you can assume if it's being shot through it, you can assume that they'll be there on the other side. But it's not until you look at them that you are actually able to measure them and see them. And what the reality is that like when not being actively observed but still measured, what we've come to find is that like these things are behaving differently on this side. But as soon as we observe them, they behave the way that we would assume that they would be, in an observable fashion. But prior to observance of them, they are not behaving in an observable fashion. So that thing that we're shooting these between, that veil that is determining what is observable and what isn't, is this intermission. It was the intermission. That's religion, spirituality. the convergence of one's physical self with one's spiritual self or intellectual self, emotional self. The veil between being dead and being alive. All my ancestors still live through me, right? I'm the veil. I'm the intermission. I'm the main character. I'm also the witch that cursed everything. I'm also the king, the arrogant king that owns everything. I'm the master and the sage. I am the creator and the creation. I am the beginning and the end. I'm starting to realize this. I'm coming into this concept. I'm beginning to embrace my role as both the monster and the defeater of the monster, right? I'm both Medusa as the monster. I'm Medusa as the woman that deserved justice. I'm Goliath. I'm David. I'm David as a humbly lowly shepherd. I'm David as a high appointed warrior, right? I'm all of these things. I'm Goliath as a scary, intimidating giant. I'm Goliath as a headless fucking body on the ground that had been killed by a little boy. I'm all of these things. In that acceptance, in that realization, now it's taken a process, like I said, because initially this is in the reverse and we're not able to process it properly because of the split in the space-time continuum. We're simply not able to see our ego death properly because we're standing outside of ourselves. There's a benefit of being able to see yourself in the third person so that you can recognize yourself clearly. But the second that you realize that when you wave your right hand, your reflection is actually waving its left in order to mimic you, suddenly there comes that whole like, I don't know who I am again. How can I know who I am if the thing that I'm using in order to determine who I am isn't actually me, but merely a reflection of me? Immediately at the same time, just like within the singularity, you would then become aware that you are the creator of that reality and perception, and that it's upon your capacity to be able to receive those things that reality functions. So at the exact same time that we're becoming aware of the rift, that we're becoming aware of these two separate timelines, that we're becoming aware of the veil that we've had over us to be able to properly observe, we're also lifting that veil and we're observing. And just like in the double slit experiment, at the simultaneously at the time that we are observing, we are also measuring, and those things are defining, and in defining we are confining. And so in order to free the reality from this curse, we must also be able to do those things without that confinement, which means that we must alchemize what we even believe to, what we understand to be valid reality. Because there's a toxicity that we're choking ourselves out with. It's our own shit. And until we have purified that, we cannot process this any better, any more deeply. But now the tides are changing. Okay? It's not about us being the star in the sense of there being one great, there's one person, there's one love of my life, there's one hero to the story. It's not like that. Anyone that plays Skyrim is dragonborn innately. Every single person that plays Mario as Mario, or that plays Skyrim at all, that plays any of these games, if you are playing the game, you are the main character. There's only one main character, but it's all of us. We're all the main character. We're all the creator. We're all the creation. All of it is just us. But it's all just the one thing. And so and I keep saying this about the star card, when it's like this star looks exactly the same as when it's like this, as when it's like this, as when it's like this. It doesn't matter which direction the reality that exists around the star, it doesn't matter how that exists. It doesn't matter if it's split. The star is going to remain the same. This star remains the same. This is the main character, but this is us, right? And so now the tides are changing. What was being poured out Imbalance is now being received back into the main character in balance. This is all reflective of that. I don't know how much more time I'm going to have. This is going to be a 4-part fucking series. This is going to be a 4-part series. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to end it here because we're already over an hour. Upload it, and then we will finish the story because we've still got a little bit more in this chapter before we get to the end, before we come to the final conclusion, before we read the very last page, and then when we close the book is when I'm going to show us what the actual front and back cover look like, since we got to that part secondary. So stick with me, we got one more coming.